This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business. Welcome back to Confronting the Line, where we discuss the world of transformation, personal development, these types of things, and we look right on the line about some stuff that might be exploitative or damaging and the stuff that's really great and transformational. My name is Mark Tafoya. I'm here with Ann L. Peterson, author of the book, Is This a Cult? And we're going to dive right back in to our conversation with Exene Paloma. We're discussing kind of like structural power, essentially, right? And when you last left us, we were talking about how it's sort of easy for someone who maybe physically looks like Exene on the outside can replicate certain kinds of powerful dynamic in leading groups of people and coaching with groups of people, and how for some people it's not so easy. You know, if they have a different skin, a different gender, or a different outward gender that people might give more or less respect to. So let's jump right back in.
Cool. Yeah, or personality even, right? Or internal traits, or history, where they were, punished too much for speaking out, and so they don't speak confidently in rooms anymore, or any number of things, or where they're from, it's not that kind of culture, So you come from somewhere else, being on time, like, what are you talking about? That's insane. I've done some consulting with someone who, a colleague of mine, I think it was this kid, was living in South America somewhere at the time. I can't remember where. And was trying to hey, I'm down here. There's a nonprofit. We're doing this project. Do you guys want to consult? And wow, watching how quickly the distinctions we were using went bankrupt when you're trying to confer an idea of integrity that is extraordinarily Western, white idea of integrity, showing up on time. Everything's in this weird, not only hierarchy, but broken out pieces, and and they don't operate that way. Shockingly, they still manage to live and survive and get shit done, right? But it conveyed, we couldn't get anything across, and I didn't know what else do we talk about here, right? If you're a landmarking consultant and you remove the being on time and the keeping your word in those kind of inflexible ways, even the honoring it, the version of honoring it where that means you have to have a longer fucking conversation to address it in advance and whatever, just no context for it whatsoever. And it's just, we're all right, I don't know what to say.
Well, interesting. I
what are we
actually
talking about?
I have a little pushback on that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, because one of the projects that I was really blessed to be a part of was we delivered 2 forums and 1 leadership course in Haiti, in northern Haiti. And now, why this was successful, I have to give huge kudos to Pam Prosser, who, with her now ex-husband Dale Snyder, they started this NGO probably at least 30 years ago now. And it's all around water, creating water systems in small towns in northern Haiti. But one of the things Pam wanted was she wanted to also introduce transformational technologies. And she wanted to do that because she wanted Haitians to be empowered to be the ones to develop Haiti. So rather than having the outside, she really understood the whole dangers and problems of the whole, missionary, the white savior, the outside thing, which we're really coming to see, how dangerous that actually is. And to local cultures, to local people, to their psyche, to all of that. So anyway, so she finally talks Harry into saying yes. And through the Vanto Group, their business organization, who's going to kind of manage it, they're going to do, for very, very, very low cost, they're going to give a forum leader to this project in Haiti. And of course, they're going to get some good press out of this and whatnot. But I do think they really were okay, fine. I mean, really, 7 years she worked on them. She wore them down. And Pam's a hard person to say no to. So we go to Haiti, and they send the only Black forum leader they have, Larry Pearson. And they, because he's Black and because he's also done a lot of work with Vanto. Vanto did work in South America. Vanto did work in South Africa. And they used Larry a lot because they needed a person of color, right? So I know
people
that's why
of global majority is how we say it
this
now.
is a great idea, Bland. This really flies in the face of the point I was making. Go on.
Yeah. No, it's good. That's why I thought I'd bring it up, because I was like, oh my God, I think this is going to totally make his point.
Good.
So, and I want to sort of represent the naive white woman that I am. So, and I know I am. To me, that is what we can do with our privilege, is we can acknowledge it. And that's what we do.
That's
and
all
it's
that's
fine.
needed.
That's where it all starts. Acknowledge there's
all that's
quality,
needed.
acknowledge there's a privilege, right?
I always say I'm tall. People, you can't tell us in here. I'm 5'11", but I'm tall, white, and pretty. So even though I was a teen mother, I got a lot of opportunities, because when 10 people walk in for that job, the tall, white, pretty girl, and I always say white and pretty because and tall, all three of those things have been shown in studies to give advantage.
Yeah.
Taller people, prettier people all get advantage over
in this particular Western culture.
In
where
this
we
particular
value
culture.
that.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, and it's been so spread, I mean, through colonization, right? You know, even walking into Haiti, you know, blanc. So anyway, and people are going to like turn and listen, because all of the resources in that culture have been coming from, you know, the aid culture. So this is Pam's whole mission, though. She wants to actually show the Haitian, you know, give something to the Haitian people that leaves them with an understanding that they don't need outsiders. They got what they need because they got it in themselves. Beautiful mission. Beautiful mission. It's great. We go down, we do 2 forums. They're both very different. But one of them, the whole integrity conversation there wasn't anything about being on time, because Pam pretty much schooled. She said, just knock that off. Just knock that shit off. Some of these people start walking before dawn, 5 hours to get here. You know, what we did instead is we gave breakfast. So basically, if you got there on time, you got breakfast. And which is the most basic way to manage people, is with food.
Yeah.
So, you know, and we saved breakfast, just so nobody puts anything shitty in the comments. We saved breakfast for the people who got there late. They still got their breakfast. But it wasn't as hot. Okay. So none of that was on purpose. But the point was, but what did happen is the first day we go to serve the lunch, these are starving people. There's like 325 people. They've come from all over. We go to serve the lunch, and there's not enough lunches. Like 70 people don't get lunch. Well, we find out that that's because a lot of the first people in the line were taking 2 lunches and 3, because they're going to take it home to their families.
Yes.
And so that becomes the issue of integrity in the thing, you know,
integrity conversation. Wow.
and the integrity thing. Now, and interestingly enough, you know, as Larry goes in, and, you know, I'm in the back of the room. I'm the course manager, essentially. There was another course supervisor, but I'm like, my job is to have Larry win in this thing.
You're holding the being of the space.
Exactly. And the team, and thank God, Pam, she was so great. She made the team were Haitian Americans and you know, people who were from Haiti but had experience. So there was only a few of us Blancos that were allowed to be on the team for our particular expertise.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it really became, what was cool, as I recall it, was, you know, Larry, and quickly a pastor that was in the crowd and the guy who was the mayor of the town, like, they kind of got on Larry's side right away. And they're like, look, you know, who are we going to be for our community? It was a little advanced courses, I guess. But anyway, it ends up being like, are we willing, you know, to have everybody have food? We also had a whole garbage thing, because the cleanup staff went and cleaned up all the garbage. And then Larry basically shamed them, said, look, you're going to have these people come in out of your country, out of your community, and clean up your garbage. Like, why are you doing that? And, you know, look, at the end of the forum, it was...
You're responsible for this place being garbage in the first place? I don't know. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
No,
you're going too far ahead in the line of thinking.
It's just interesting, because as you're talking, I'm like, but Exene, it was like so cool, you know, and it was so, you know, and my husband like rolled up his sleeves and worked with Mama Chef, and they lit, you know, 10 more fires, and I was freaking out about his Nordstrom shirt. Anyway, he's like over these fires in Haiti, and
you gotta get people fed.
It was great. Well, we brought in, we had the resources, we made more food, and had a whole conversation, of course. But what I'm interested in, the thing you're saying is, but does it leave any lasting difference? So I know that that NGO still exists. Here's where it made the difference, actually. I just got the answer to my own question. they actually eventually figured out, having to work around the rules with the affiliates and whatnot, but they figured out how to integrate the ideas into the water systems build out. So they started they kind of combined a micro lending approach. They started combining approaches, functional approaches to dealing with a real problem. These communities having water wells is a really big deal for their health and for all that. And the thing that's different is they all have to pay. They pay a few cents in, and there's a committee. So they don't just go put wells in. They actually create what's that called? Basically utilities in these communities, and then they train people how to lead those utilities. But actually, what I can see is why it worked is because the leader there, a really great guy by the name of Neil, he really translated the ideas, responsibility, accountability, and he translated those into not just the language, French Creole, which is challenging. There's only 800 words in that language, so it's tough. But he really brought those ideas alive through what they were dealing with. Really,
he translated it culturally and experientially.
Which was one of the reasons why we couldn't keep bringing him back, because I was like, oh, we'll keep doing it. But there was a big problem in that Vanto and the various consulting firms were all happy to be hired in, and even be hired in at way below their rates and whatever, but they would never agree to leave the ideas there, which is why they stopped working with them. And my friend Suzanne and her husband Dwight have some amazing leadership work based in a lot of similar ideas, but done very differently, and it's got its own copyright and all that. And so we went in 2020. I was so sick of them trying to get consultants to work with them that would help them do this translation work. I finally said, forget it. I'll do it. And I got Suzanne, who was the president of the Hunger Project at the time, which has also developed that. Very cool what's happened in that organization, but it's the same thing. They stopped coming in with the outside ideas or with the better idea or with the exact tech.
I mean,
just laying that over something that already existed.
Yeah. Oh no, it's pretty amazing how they're literally like, here's an idea, go make it your own, and we're here to answer questions. Like, that's it. There's no you can do anything you want to it. You don't,
Yeah, it's just presenting.
Exactly.
So one of the things, so what I hear is, personally, the ideas is one thing. Again, I don't think the ideas are what make the forum work for the people who do the forum and have a good experience. So for me, those things are not inherently connected. Any one of us, there's a reason you can read those ideas in a book. Usually better written books, usually simpler, more accessible versions of those ideas than the ones that are designed to control people. But still sounds to me like white folks going into a place that white folks fucked up. And instead of just providing the shit that people need and put themselves back on their feet and assuming they can actually do it, the idea that we've got to impregnate them with these kinds of ideas as if nobody who hasn't herd integrity would actually be able to, or without using that word at all, like the meal state, right? Like, hey, now, as long as that conversation did end with literally everybody, including the people in those people's families that they're going to try to take your food to, as long as that meant everybody ate at the meal breaks, cool, then I guess the reasoning still holds up, right? Because otherwise, that's where that shit usually falls short. It's like, oh, you're going to steal from us? You got to stand for it's possible for everybody. And it's just like, cool, I'm going to go home. My fucking family's still hungry.
We figured out how to make more food.
So you figured out how to actually succeed. So what made the difference? The demo of some weird half-applied integrity, or the fact that people all ate? And the fact that the well systems are designed in a way that even without that stuff, where it's just late. But again, we have this unavoidable thing in our culture that we are all stuck in so much. Again, here's what we can't see. What if empowering people to figure out shit for themselves meant you made sure they had the material, real life fucking resources to do things for themselves, and then gave them some resources to, kind of like you described, the new version on the project, right? Now listen, there are some concepts available. There are some other resources available if you want to go further in this, but really what you need is food. really what you need is a system, is a sustainable network here that you can draw from and all work from. Yeah, ideally, what you would need is for the global north not to have been pulling out your resources and forcing all into wars into like debauchery for like the last 500 to 600 to 1,000 years. But since we're not going to do that, and we're not even going to acknowledge that that's playing a role here, what we're going to do is help you as long as you buy into something. Like, there's still just so much of that shit that feels so.
Sometimes,
and in the case of Haiti, it's important to note, in the case of Haiti specifically, they got their independence from France by owing France money in almost perpetuity. Like that's the piece that we have to understand with Haiti.
Adapted,
they have to pay France money for its independence.
But here's the thing, and we'll have somebody on from the Hunger Project in the coming months, because I learned a lot working with them in their now iteration, which is very different from where they started.
Yeah, and I don't have any experience with anything new. I just know the kind of bullshit order we're selling.
Well, because here's a little bit of the problem I've got with what you're saying, which is I don't think it's this or that. I think it's both and. So yes, the Euro-Western, whole colonialization has created havoc, absolute and total havoc for hundreds of years now. I mean, it's not even, it's not like something we can just go whoop and clean up. We can't do that. So, but part of the havoc that we've created is that we have suppressed minds. We have, quote unquote, brainwashed people into a kind of subservience, into a kind of despair. And, I've gone into these communities, and Suzanne and I started creating a course called Imagining in Action, because we realized what we had to first give back to people was the freedom to imagine. Like to just even imagine. So because part of like even Pam's whole mission was about empowering the Haitian people to empower themselves. That's all she wanted. She does not care. I'll tell you what, she does not care if it comes from Landmark or from Martians or from a bag of rice, like all of it. Yes. And that woman is a walking yes. And so there is a piece I think we have to be responsible for. We can't just give resources either. The only reason I say that is because we've done that, and we've so trained, those cultures have so been trained in the dominator way of thinking, the dominator mindset, they just replicate it. And it was all over Haiti when I had to study that going there, because it's one of the few places where the slaves revolted and they threw out the slave holders, but then they replicated the culture. So those that knew French and Creole, they became essentially the top of the hierarchy. And then the people who just knew Creole, those field workers, were at the bottom. So they took the same system and put it in place. So it's more to dismantle these systems than just hand in the resources.
But I'm going to push back now.
Okay, good. This is fun. This is why Exene and I have so much fun.
I don't buy anything like. So now you're saying what point that I would agree with. Yes, the answer is dismantling those systems. The idea that a fucking Landmark, or really anyone else, like we talked a little bit earlier, right, about how pervasive that mindset is. Yeah, it is. And if you challenge it, like what you find is what people go to is the belief, well, it's that way because it's the best way, right? Like the automatic next thing to say is like, well, isn't that because it worked? I mean, it's the whole like, isn't capitalism great because on my iPhone? And it's just like, cool. If something's the only thing you've done, that doesn't say anything about what could have been produced or what was possible otherwise, similar to the Landmark conversation. When you got something out of it, like, but I could have done other things, and that might have gone differently as well, right? This happens to be what it is. But I don't believe that, like, a group whose whole approach is absolutely rooted, invisibly or not, in kind of white supremacist, old school, patriarchal, cis heteronormative culture, dominance hierarchies is gonna, what could they possibly provide? If the forum allowed people to get free of that, Landmark wouldn't fucking exist. Like,
and
it would
unquestionably
like,
so.
I don't have that problem anymore.
Yeah. All that said,
like,
all that stuff you said, and unquestioningly, like we haven't even thought, most of us haven't even thought that it's all built on that structure.
Yeah. And
it
so
just seems like it's great, Right.
And assume, and then people can say, well, it's other places. Of course it is. Like, this is the dominant force in our world at the moment, like the things I just read off, right? That's like the dominant force in the world. And so I don't believe that anyone coming from inside of it who doesn't know they're inside of it's going to go somewhere else and somehow provide the answer. You're just going to give them the same version. Like, you're going to repeat that shit again. Hopefully they control their own water, but also like you can do those things without, and I mean, it's not just landmark, there are other ideas. And again, like, no, I like the idea of like having stuff available. Hey, have you thought about this? But what was happening there before people came from the outside and fuck their stuff up?
Like,
because I think those answers are okay until you get back in the, well, since everyone else is like this, don't we all have to be like that so we can fight each other, right? So all these hierarchies can line up and bash against each other. And it's like, no, the communities were doing something. And I'm also not about going backwards, and so everything that everyone believed, 1,000 years ago is actually like accurate. But there are communal practices, and especially in communities of color. And for some of the white folks, the gays, the queers among us have been having to carve this stuff out in the middle of the mess for a long time. You've got to live a certain way, and community has to take care of itself, and you form your own practices and all these kinds of things around it. In our case, and if you're an American queer, you're like, in the middle of the weirdness through our history, which sometimes was very overt, the oppression, and still pretty much is, though some groups have elevated, shockingly, the normal-looking white cis gay guys.
White gays.
Exactly.
White gays.
The ones that Landmark lets in.
Not even cis gays of color. And not to mention the black trans women. Right?
We still have done work where we exist in a certain way that other people can't relate to. Like, you would be amazed, even with like the privilege that I have inherently, and people used to think I was fucking around with them when I would describe after I was like fully out and stuff in 2020 and came out like, and I'm like, I live in a pretty gay neighborhood and like also economically kind of diverse neighborhood, and people just get thrown off just by me looking the way I do. And I'm not fully trans. It's just, but like, you got enough paint going on a certain vibe, and you realize that they're not a backup dancer or something. Like, there's a weird response that happens. Like, it's not okay. And I think if we were coming from the perspective of letting people's communities be okay the way they were, even when we don't understand it, assuming that they're not harming other people actively. Right. So like, my makeup isn't murdering anyone or abusing anyone.
Yeah.
And we of course also know that
just highlights the eyes.
Yes, but it does at first, and people do associate it immediately with some certain things, because this culture has spun people that look like me to be the groomer and the weirdo and the abuser and the whatever, and like the person you can't trust, even though this culture, all of the kid abuse comes from religious figures in power and like football coach, people with actual authority, like.
Well, that's why I think, it's great that, Mark, your story too. So one of the things about Landmark, and I would assert this is likely similar in although I hear Scientology is incredibly anti-gay, but Landmark prides itself on being open to everyone, for everyone, translatable, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is sincere until you try to become a leader. And then when you try to become a leader, you suddenly have to conform. Well, now isn't that interesting? Yeah. Now that starts to tell us something about it starts to really tell us something about the work itself. Wait, how come this work can only be delivered by people that look this way, that speak in this kind of tone modulation, that use their hands? We all use our hand. Like, even as women, I mean, in the women crowd, women talk in the ladies' rooms around Landmark and in the leader things, they'll remark often about it's such a masculine environment, and you have to kind of shift yourself to fit into that, really. Although you definitely should wear skirts and heels, but
skirts, heels,
like, no kidding.
When it's time to register people, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't know if it's still that way, but back when I led, it was like, but you had to have the suit jacket on, and you had to look a certain way, and you had to, because
there's no transformation without lipstick, I've heard some people say.
That's right. Well, because here's why, though. This is what this conversation is revealing to me. Like, what it's opening up for me is because the work only works in a dominant structure.
Yeah.
it only works if the leader is dominating the room, is dominating the conversation, is that, you know, that's the whole thing. I have this fantastic video. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes. It's called Enoughness. And it's a 3-minute video that shows basically what's at the crux of what I think is the issue, which is the dominator mindset, which is resources are to be owned. Everything is about ownership. What I own is how I win the game, and owning the one that owns the most wins the most, right? Kind of thing. That is the thing versus indigenous mindset, which they refer to it as enoughness in this video. But the indigenous mindset is we don't own anything. We are stewards. We're here as stewards. That's why when people go, oh, well, that's, you know, the so-and-so's land and so-and-so's land, that's not even really quite accurate in an indigenous mindset, because they aren't that they own that land. That is their area. You know, they were given that as the people. They are stewards. The Navajo people are stewards of the Navajo land, or try to be. So, but that's the whole shift away from ownership. You know, if you take that ownership piece out, so to have power, for me to have real power, you have to share power. So, and that's the thing that's missing. You know, I don't see an Exene or have Exene say my pronouns are they. There's no threat to me of that, other than I look like a fool because I only get it right about 70% of the time, which I'm very proud of, by the way, Exene. I've been practicing. So
and also Exene being magnanimous about when you don't, right?
When it doesn't matter whether I agree or disagree about pronouns or what my personal opinion is, I'm going to use the pronouns that Exene asks because it respects Exene's humanity. That's a human being. That's a brother over there. Well, a they. So I hate Latinized language. That's the whole problem. It's also a sibling.
I'm doing the most difficult version of everything here, Ann.
I love it. I know, but you know, gosh, that's how we evolve. That's how we maturate, is we be willing to have conversations with folks like you that challenge our very way of thinking, that challenge us to come to the line and look at the other side, look around and see. And so I can see just out of this whole conversation, because my whole question was, wait, how is power and privilege play in the personal development field? And I can see the whole thing to deliver the way it has been delivered requires a hierarchical power structure. At least it has. I participate in a spiritual group that doesn't really have that component. Which is probably also part of why I can see it.
Right. And a lot of different kinds of groups, self-help or not, or whatever, you know, spiritual, like whatever. I mean, there are different ways of running any kind of group or organization. And even then, right, I just said running. Which kind of implies
facilitating.
Like
I use the word facilitating.
But like I do, you know, like I co-organize a number of different things, including like a monthly queer coffee meetup, which a friend of mine with somebody else started years and years ago, just as an option for folks to come out and do something during the day once a month that wasn't like club and bar or hidden related. Because the reality of the you know, the history of the queer culture is everything's been hidden for the longest time because it was persecuted and punished being what you were doing. And so everything goes underground, and then there's the bar scene, right? And then there's all of that thing. And some of us aren't a big fan of that necessarily. And so it was created this space. And there's a lot of groups, like there's a lot of these kind of different groups now, right? And there's like, hey, you sign up and you register and you do this, and here's like the agenda, and people are doing whatever. And that's fine. Like, you know, I mean, this is one of those, you do have other options. So you do have choice. No one's like, you're not being forced into this group. Ours is just like, there's no signing up. I do like an Instagram post like literally once a month. Usually last week it was 3 days before the thing was coming, and then we share it a couple times. We show up like halfway through. Grace and I, my friend who kind of co-organizes it, we come up with an icebreaker. And we give everyone a chance who's there halfway through, because queer time means that some of the folks, even though if we start at noon, they're not coming until 1, right? And so like we go 12 to 2, show up when they can, do whatever you want. You can bring cross stitch, you can do whatever you want, you can be really engaged. At one point, we will have everyone introduce themselves, name, pronouns, and some goofy icebreaker question we came up with. And sometimes we don't even do that because we don't want to interrupt naturally occurring conversation and just socialization with the structure. And so like there's there are a lot of different ways to organize groups and I enjoy that way better because it's less work, right? I'm not running around managing everything. Like,
you didn't have to do a massive guest game for that.
Well, and and I trust adults to be adults. And you made the comment earlier, like, what's the best way to manage people is with food. And like, people is a stretch. A great way to manage children or people with the brain, like in those like simplistic environments, is with food and treats, right?
But I'm an event producer, so that's like where you do the food and drink has a lot to do with where you get people. Yeah.
And I've done some of those events too, and then most people die after the break because the sugar rush dies down.
Oh, you'd love mine. I make everybody eat vegetable sticks, which they all grumble about.
I learned that because then going unconscious doesn't work for the landmarking approach, right? But also, I also just want to point out, it's not part of our conversation, but the wild fragility of the supposed value that your environment has to be so fucking controlled, and that the person delivering the work has to be representational of a norm that you can probably identify yourself in somehow, right? And then we were joking about this weird kind of switching out between the things, right? But and like the environments, and there's just like this one plant and the austerity. And I mean, you don't have to be from the 70s to know like some of those folk. I've been in a room with Charlene Aframo, and so I've watched people like set the chairs and do all the thing, and like there's a story, the most acceptable reason for it, it's not just like because that somehow on its own creates magic, is that it's disruptive, but it's your job in production. I was on staff in production and of course supervisor, which was also one of those wildly illegal things that they were doing for a while. I was volunteering in the same department that I was getting paid to work in, and that's a no. But anyway, the job is to get the environment out, right? The people who assist, you can't wear the flashy colors because you're invisible. The job is the environment's gone, and all there is, is this. It's just you in the conversation. Yeah. And so if that's the control there, and the thought that like something else, what else is going to happen if somebody is also able to like check their phone every 20 minutes, or if they're taking notes, right? Are they going to be some people only process that way. Well, and so like the amount of control they have to produce a specific result, which is still not even being produced by the things they're claiming it is, which is their conversation, their narrative, the work, the ideas around it, is wild. And if you pull all that shit away, what you just have is just the rest of self-help. Like, they didn't invent integrity, didn't invent authenticity. In fact, you bastardized it. And your main source for authenticity is someone who used their own ideas to justify being a Nazi. And so cool Heidegger poll, guys. But I know Heidegger's authenticity model because I'm the kind of who went and read Heidegger and went and read, once I was done with Warner, I went the next level back, and I could see where you pull these things from. And Heidegger's authenticity is, yes, telling the truth, knowing that you have a lot, but finite capacities and directions. Not everything is actually possible. Also, big into you're going to die, right? Authenticity is for a human, like you've got an end to your arc. And so in this space, now what do I choose? And it's totally fine just to choose the thing you're doing. I'm going to own that, which he brought up when there was criticism for him being a member of the Nazi party, right? And so, like, I don't think that's an accident. I don't think that where they pull. I don't think that you pulled your workshop model from mind dynamics and pulled your
actually mostly more Scientology and leadership dynamics.
And you pulled your business model from Scientology. It doesn't feel coincidental that the most like just off-putting, and in some cases, if you're going to use the word evil, like Nazis are pretty much the standard bearer, right? Like we use like the Hitler conversation, the Nazi, like everyone that we want to swing wildly, bring a Nazi into the conversation.
You evoke that.
We say once you've mentioned Hitler, you've lost the argument.
Yes, right. And so, well, I think another useful part of that is like someone who knew Heidegger well, which is Hannah Arendt, who wrote a book about the Nuremberg trials and stuff like that afterwards. And she had a little personal relationship with Heidegger, so it was a little conflicted and not super reliable with where she came down about him. But, she has the famous thing, looking at Eichner and all those folks and realizing that they passed all their psych tests, according to psychology at the time. like some of those like the leading Nazis were some of the most well-adjusted folks out there. And she has the quote, the banality of evil. Because when you're interacting with the person, it's not some freaking cartoon devil or not even like the weird demagogue Hitler type. It's someone who can explain to you who has a great family. There's a great movie recently, The Zone of Interest, that kind of portrays this very well.
That one.
Nazis living in this very structured, aren't we like good while perpetrating the most heinous things?
Yeah.
And the reason
There's
the
a
movie
wall 10 feet away from when the kids are playing.
Yeah, you can smell
where
the people
ovens
burning,
are
right?
on. Yeah.
And the reason the movie hits is because more and more people realize that's not just a metaphor for the rest of Nazism. That's Western culture. That is the culture that we're talking about, who has done like perpetuated like horrible things. And the fact that you test out as being okay is not a good test for what okay means. And these folks have pulled some of the most devious, nasty parts of the culture and left behind some of like, hey, maybe there's someone else to pull from besides Heidegger, or maybe someone to pull from, that wasn't. There are all these screaming kind of, even Fernando Flores has some great work out there, but is also, you don't have to look far on the internet to find people complaining about like, he comes into our business and starts screaming at people like they're assholes in their faces. Like he's a brutal, and he's been through some shit. But he came out a dictator. Guy got imprisoned by a dictator,
right?
Put in by our country. Just throwing this out. I've got facts beyond Haiti, right? Our CIA supports in his country, and the fascist comes in, imprisons and murders everybody. Fernando Flores gets imprisoned, and hurt people, and he comes squirting out the other side. Sometimes, and then Warner picks it up, and it's still that very screamy, nasty, and the sources they're pulling from are not good sources. And the tests that they're using, let's say, like in our personal tests, right? How could this person do this? This person I've interacted with 100 times, like some of us experienced a couple of weeks ago, like, oh, this person choked out somebody? Like, shit. I didn't think this was going there, but I definitely know how it's possible. Because the answer to the inquiry of how come this happens to some people in this environment, but that doesn't happen to other people around the same person, is because, well, nobody abuses everybody.
Right.
Like nobody abuses everybody all the time. But if you're pulling, the work that you're emulating and that you've fully internalized says that given the mission you're on, everything is okay.
That's the thing, is given them.
It was written by Nazis to justify Nazism. Then you were going to end up doing some nasty shit as you're out here trying to like lay your bullshit on the world in an attempt to save it, which only means make it more like me. Saving everything at Landmark means make it more like Werner, who's a white guy, and we don't have to get into the whole like his family being like ashamed Jewish people and all that kind of shit, who are like changed their religion and then he changes to it like a fucking German name and stuff. Like there's so many weird dynamics, but all of Landmark is about being more like Werner, and having a world that works means it looks more like Werner, because if everybody acted like Werner, this place would be working, which is a lot.
That's the fundamental thing, I think, that is at the heart of destructive cult, right? So I love Chris Shelton always says this thing, cult is part of culture, right? When you put groups of people together, you're going to get, cultive dynamics, so to speak. So we're not even here to denigrate all cults, right? But there is a destructive cult, and that is, you just spoke to the top thing that most people recognize, is if there is a singular leader that is forcing people to conform. And I think one of the most insidious parts about groups like Landmark is that was all there, but it was hidden.
Yeah.
It was hidden. And, and Mark, your story, when you first shared your story with me, when we first met about, being, as you're on the leader track, and at a certain point being told that you need to assimilate and that you need to conform and that you need to change your lifestyle in an organization that teaches freedom and full self-expression. Like it just is so hypocritical. You can't, at a certain point, you just can't buy it anymore. You got to go like, wait, you got to start questioning what's going on here, really.
And what's important to note about that, and you said it earlier, I want to really clarify that. Like, so they're saying like, you have to be like this and you can't be like that. And we want to use the fact of your being different to show how diverse we are. right? They want and believe, like we said, every
That
participant
is
loves being able to go to the microphone in the Landmark Forum and say, I am gay, I am trans, I am this. And it's like, yay, everyone's going to clap. Yay, you may have had a breakthrough because you could say it out loud. And we're going to welcome. And there was never, ever, ever, ever any like, you're not welcome to be gay. You're not welcome to be queer. Like never any of that. And again, celebrated in a certain way. But then like, that inside, that who you are, you have to deliver this. You can't be doing that to deliver this because you have to be like that guy.
Yeah,
that's what makes it even more insidious.
Well, isn't that another form of exploitation? I mean, aren't you then? You're very, at a certain level, your very gayness, as it were, is or queer. That's being exploited to show off how cool we are, or how open we are, or whatever.
It's like, oh, you can be a little effeminate if you want to, or you can have crazy glasses and this and that. It's not. Oh, what you actually do in your private life is not something that, people are going to be scandalized by that, and then the irony, the only reason they're scandalized by it is because you're the ones that are talking about it. I kept it private. You people are talking about it.
And then they saw you on an app that they were on, which is whatever. No, it's only in so much as it serves the purpose. Just like, so your gayness, Brian's gayness, Larry's blackness, which is the easiest example. They're sending him all over the place, having him have bullshit 2020 conversations. Dude sees his blackness is like the least relevant thing about him. Because of course you just disown your actual past, right? We just fucking disown it because who you are is being created in your word. Just kidding. It's Black Horner. And with the cute chairs. And by the way, Larry came out of Buffalo. So I know a lot of people, my family members, my stepdad was in seminars with Larry while he was doing seminars, then Larry while he was leading. And there was all sorts of other, it wasn't Larry, but like all sorts of other weird shit happening at the time around here. But that is, the differences are okay insofar as they further the agenda and then you become reassimilated.
They're useful.
Because if Werner is not like that, like the vision is that's what you end up being like, and it does mean persona, and it does actually functionally mean dress, or at least dress and presentation within some kind of bounds. Hence, the folks have had to cut off their dreads and their different things like all
their
those
cultural hair. Not just I like this, but this is my culture.
Stuff exists, and you're intentionally severing it from it because. And whether or not they're accurate is only a business conversation, because no, that doesn't actually make things better from a business perspective. But when you're trying to literally reproduce Werner, it does make sense. And so back to, Anne's book thing, right? Is like the only answer that has some of the questions make sense is and whether or not, who cares if I don't care about the word either, because was Miramax a cult? No, but Harvey Weinstein was a piece of shit who needed to be removed from his position of power and have face consequences for what he did. I don't give a shit if landmarks are cult or not.
And many people upheld the behavior too. That's a part of it.
Yeah.
Yes, I have an opinion about landmark and how they qualify or they don't. I know Rick Ross's views and whatever. Who cares? I literally don't care if you call it a cult or not. I do. I just colloquially call it a self-help call, and then when I tell stories, people are like, "Oh shit, you really weren't kidding about that." No, it's not a joke, but also it doesn't need to be a cult to deserve being stopped in its tracks.
And you think it should be stopped in its tracks because of why? Can you say it in a few sentences?
Because the person who has the most power. And a couple of people around him who happen to be his family members who left the company to run the board. That makes a lot of fucking sense.
They did not leave the company. They left management.
And other people in New York have been actively abusing people in multiple ways for a long, long time. And until that is addressed openly and not just acknowledged, because if you acknowledged it, there's a problem. Right? Because some of that shit isn't past the statute. And so, but you have to acknowledge it and then do the thing that the forum leaders claim they all did as part of their homework to become forum leaders. They talk about going out and cleaning up the most stupid bullshit. I stole $5 from the store 40 years ago, and how do I clean it up? And you can't acknowledge a built-in pattern of abuse that clearly this one person has. And the Rosenbergs are covering. People are still, you should just talk to we already had this. It's in the book. It's in all these other places. people have gone to people. And people are complaining, why are you sending our people to Werner who don't even know they're being abused? It's just bad in general. Like, it is going to keep happening. And then when Werner dies, there's another Rosenberg at the top, and maybe he's not going to be that much of an asshole, but it's the same people.
Well, at this point, because inside the whole conversation for designation, I really love Brian's conversation about do away with the whole designation thing. Because to be designated forum leader, to be designated seminar leader, to be designated wisdom course leader, whatever, means that you have become the distinction. You're the you that was you is expressed through that distinction. You are the distinction forum leader. You are, okay, but what is the distinction forum leader? It's Werner Erhard.
Yeah,
that's who it is.
And it changes as it's convenient, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, sorry to interrupt you there.
Well, then there's de-designation. So how could you be designated as an idea if de-designation is possible? I mean, the whole thing's but yeah, the point is what that means. What you are being, if you are actually doing the job, if you're being the job in any of those high jobs, is some version of Werner, or if you're a only center staff, then there is the woman version of it, frankly, right? Because if you look at the splits, which gender is doing most of the forum leading and which gender is doing most of the taking care of home back in the centers?
Yeah.
Weird, like the dynamics there, and they're supporting each other in a weird way, but it's all about supporting the figure that is supposed to be ultimately Werner. And
well, because Werner's the ideal. It's not even, I think Werner was the ideal before Werner was Werner, because Werner is, the ideal, self-made man. I mean, he's, and yes, he happens to be, 6'2" and white, and, but he's self-made, which in the United States is, extra, like you get extra cred for that. Or, at least faking being self-made. So Werner is actually self-made, but
let me go on a small tangent with that, if I can, for as well, a non-Werner tangent for just a moment, because in the conversation of things that are in our culture that are bullshit that Landmark is doing too, and most of us don't realize what that's of course, self-made is an absolute impossibility. But like, let's just take in good faith that thing, and look at the other people that we hold up as being these self-made. You can go one at a time, because the other person that pops up, I mentioned Weinstein, right? Elon Musk is real famous right here. Certain types of people really love him. And certain types of people know that he came out of money on apartheid fucking emerald mines. So while he did scrap out on his own and only brought a backpack, I know this well, because I do come from I've lived in a car before. I lived out of a car for a while, but for most of my life, there was a place to go back to if I fell hard enough and if I wanted to go back there. And at a certain point, I just didn't want to go. But when your background is rich on the backs of other human beings, and then you're in part of one project, Elon Musk then bought into Tesla and had the contracts changed to make him say he was not a founder. Elon Musk has never made a fucking electric car in his life. Whole other conversation on whether that's
solar or Starlink or
he's the classic Werner, and as is Jeff Bezos. Now, cool online bookstore that you started with a $270,000 loan from your parents that you then did an internet thing in your garage, or Steve
Jobs. It starts with generational wealth to begin with, all of it.
Yeah, it starts
even if you're just middle class.
Yeah, no, it starts on a base of privilege, and then you have skill sets that are more valued in this culture than others. Being a tall, confident-speaking white man on top of a bed of privilege will get you anything. That's what Steve Jobs has, right? Steve Jobs, the only idea anyone can literally point to of his was that he put the clips on the fucking headphones for the original iPhone. That's the engineering, right? That dude is a marketer and a pitch man and an abusive asshole who's terrible to his family, which is the theme you find. Elon Musk, all these folks are absolute shit human beings who really do extreme damage to other people directly, not to mention the way they hoard wealth and power leaves us all screwed eventually. And that is the narrative which allows a Werner inside of that to be isn't it amazing that I'm doing the next level version where I just said, fuck my family, and I changed my name, and I'm out here, and I learned how to control things with my mind and how to abuse people in a room. And I made est. And I
Here's
created
the
this
thing,
word.
though, that's hidden. And it'll come out. I mean, it's coming. I know people who are writing books and are looking. Here's what's coming. If you investigate any of these guys, Elon, Werner, Weinstein, like any of them, what you're going to find is a bunch of hardworking folks, probably a lot of women and people of color around them who are, I mean, we know our engineers, some of our best engineers in this country are not coming from this country. They're coming from other
South
countries.
Asia.
Yeah. Well, I happen to live in an area that's got its corporate headquarters, and most of my neighborhood are people on H-1B1 visas because the corporation, they can't find people in this country to hire for what they need. So, anyway, makes for an incredibly diverse neighborhood. For me, it's great. But the whole around that's one of the lies that drives me crazy is, is this perpetuating this idea that somehow, like, Alan to me is one of the worst pitchmen for magic and miracles disappearing because he is of the most privileged class. So, when I left, got kicked out actually really of the landmark scope, and I put out a shingle, I can't get anywhere because anywhere I try to go there, I get threatened. I get threatened. You can't have landmark people in your programs, and you can't work with landmark people. And if you work with Ann, you can't work with us. And, there's like, I've got jackals that are like threatening people who work with me. But I also had to come to the realization that why I was so successful after 2012, when I started my event business, is because I was selling a cult leader to a cult. And I didn't know that until I was not successful. And then I had to go, wait, I'm doing all the same things. And yes, there's some other factors. There's a pandemic now. Facebook has changed the way you can target, things like that. But just that alone doesn't actually quite get to it. Even when I went to host a course that featured Alan and I in the neighborhood where we used to, our stomping grounds, and we have quite a few people that we think like us, we couldn't put 10 people together in a room. So that started to tell, like, I had to start looking around and go, wait, so there's some other dynamics at play here, and maybe they're not the whole story, but they're at least part of the story, and I need to understand it. And which I was kind of curious about. You brought up sort of the privilege. There's a kind of privilege that comes with power, and that's why it's important for us to recognize the power dynamics that we're in and around. And I mean,
all of kind of privilege comes with power, right? And power, in the way we're using it, the actual meaning of the word, ability to affect things, ability to act, right? It comes from the dynamic. I know we talked about this before, and Alan said what he said about how that rose up, and there's specifics to it, and there's just I've been in contact and worked with a number of forum leaders post their being there, and they bring the vibe, right? It's not like selling Warner to a group of people, and even that, you still got like the 400 repeat people who are going to come to every fucking Warner thing ever until he's dead.
That's right.
The acolytes and the sycophants,
and it is. You just nailed the number, by the way. That was 12 years I was doing that.
I remember seeing those back in the day, the numbers. I remember getting all the emails to register, and I'm like, no, I'm cool. I'm going to do the free webinars that the technical gets us, and then even that became too culty, because I wouldn't want to repeat about how I believed that Warner's work was going to transform the quality of life for him, like I think it would have done that already. But anyway, so an Alan or a Scott or anyone comes out, like some of the people you don't want to give power or privilege to whatsoever, but they come out and they're revered already. Right? The relationship and your role as forum leader has people think of them in a certain way, that they're amazing, that they can, again, walk into the room and just who they're being is going to shift your molecules kind of shit, right? And they
the assumption of that level of integrity, the assumption of that.
Yeah, they're just so, it's such impeccable, and they're so, like, when you're being the work, things just change around you. People used to, like, give, and forum leaders that, some of them that I still kind of like, would say that shit to me as part of the training, right? Like, hey, like, wake up a little bit. When you walk into a room, you don't realize the impact you have. Now, that's true, right? And I'm also like a big person. So, like, I am visible, and it's like, there's a truth to that. And then there's a landmark version where, like, it's magical or something, and, like, you're going to change something with it. And so I don't think that that's a real thing. And I don't think that they're aware of the power they hold. Which is a very concentrated version of this general confident white guy out here, like doing like self-made, they just they are revered in a way, and I got to experience some of it. People became clients because like, oh, I was sold to them as being like, oh no, like very adept at the work and business, and also new business stuff. And so it was a useful combo. And then I had to start selling, as those initial intros went away and those things, then it was just like selling this in the world where people don't have a relationship to it all. Like it's true and like you're powerful. You're just on the same footing as everybody else. And then you realize how fucking pointless it is to be selling the world.
Well, that's when I started to confront, it was in part because it's like, wait a minute. I can't really, I got to be careful where I put on a resume that I was this, that, and whatever for Landmark, because Landmark doesn't have a great reputation. Then I heard they were like selling certifications. And I was like, oh my God, you've got to be kidding. Because there's no marketable value to that really. Doesn't mean that you don't get that.
We're selling it to don't know that.
Right.
That's the thing that they always have in their favor is people that they're selling it to are all internal. Like they're so bubbled. Yeah. And I think I might have mentioned this before, but even in the forum, if like early in the day one, I think when they're talking about the boards and they're talking about the different shit and they hit on enrollment, and then here comes the conversation, right? Because it doesn't mean what it says on the board, but like they get into it. And then I heard this forum leader go in this wild, I forget, I think it was in Toronto, like 25-minute, 30-minute bit about how they had decollapsed or whatever the fuck, right? Uncollapsed enrollment from registration and like that big whole TBE breakthrough that it was. Yeah. And so this is this, and the registration is taking the action and one influences, but they're not the same thing. And so it's a forum. Day one. Nobody is sitting in this room. Like they've never done any programs before. They don't have background for even like the conversation you're having. Like they don't know that you had these things, which is all, I mean, it's all bullshit anyway, but it's a bullshit conversation you're having because you're only used to talking to yourselves in a circle. Like nobody asked about that. Right. Nobody asked anything about enrollment versus registration because nobody who's doing the forum for their first time also did the forum 10 years prior. Yeah. Like what?
They don't know what you're talking about.
Bubbled. And it's a bubble of power. And when you leave, you don't have the same kind of power unless you keep talking to the same
You're
groups
staying
of
in
people,
the same bubble, right?
Which is also why you don't want to threaten that bubble.
Right.
So you're a former forum leader trafficking on the perceived power that you have in the world. You're not really like, does it make any sense to just sever that wildly? Like, no, I mean, some of them, and I've heard all versions. I mean, some of these folks we all know are just like not even there. But some of them, like they believe that when they walk into a room, who they're being, despite all their obvious normal human shortcoming bullshit kind of issues. Like you can't even show up for a call on time anymore, but they really think they're going to walk into a room and like some room full of like 7-figure executives are going to be like, whoa, and just change because they're a force of nature. And it's like the most like, no, there's a reason you have a group of graduates around you who are also some of the least effective folks I've ever seen in business, like I've ever seen, because they're not business people. They're just
personal transformation does not work in business.
They're trying to spread the good word, right? They are missionaries, right? You said it earlier, and like it's the missionary vibe. And missionaries have, missionarying and going out and those things, the Mormon version. There's two purposes. One is sure to recruit, but everyone's always known for a long time now that it's not a great way of recruiting people that way. So the almost more important function is you fail to recruit. People say no, and you return to the group being like, oh, it's so harsh out here, which in Landmark, they say it one way in some religions. In Landmark, it's like, see the overwhelming mood of cynicism and resignation dominating things. I guess you should get better at your enrollment. Do you want to buy another course? Do you want to join this leadership program? Do you want to the fact that it sucks, that it's not effective is actually a group reinforcement technique. It doesn't help growth.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way before.
Yeah.
It does kind of reinforce
it. You see it in
a
lot of religions. Yeah.
They stay right
we're the real answer. So stay with us because we're the real answer. Even if we're a smaller group, they don't get it. We get it.
Yeah, and if you go knocking on someone's door with the answer and they're like, get the fuck out of here, you weirdo, you know, like you're like, see, these heathens out here. They can't hear what's possible. And it's just like, no, you have a glazed over look in the eye and you're saying shit that doesn't make sense. And saying, just go do this thing, just go do this thing, just go do this thing. It's the answer. And there's a reason that at best it's 25% effective on average forever. Even when people walk in, I mean, they used to give us these numbers like, hey, we polled them. 70% in the room said they were interested when they came in. And then 20% registered by the time everybody like left. And now let's address ourselves. Who are we being? And again, you're missing a point in here, friends. It's because the experience you've created is a fucking turnoff. 70% of people trust their friends and family members and thought like, shit, if you got something great, I want to hear what this is, and have such a weird and off-putting experience for the next 3 hours that you've sent them all out the door. And they certainly don't want to register now, even if they get badgered later on, you know, like Zeb and some of those folks. You know, like it goes on a path, but they have known for a long time that they actually hurt their own registration. They get in the way of their own registration. But also, if it's easier to register, how many of those people will bail within 20 minutes of the first day? All of them. So they don't have any easy answers. They just have the same system baked in to produce the same results. And it's not growth oriented. It's reinforcement oriented.
Well, it's just really, I mean, it's just so outdated and so outmoded. So I'm just curious here as we begin to kind of wrap up. I'd love to, you've given us a lot to think about. You've given me a lot to think about. I wanted to have Exene on to discuss this because we've just been having all these really interesting conversations. I don't agree with everything. I don't disagree with everything, but I love this is what it looks like to be on the line. You get on the line with friends and you used to go, well, what about that? And what do you think of that? And if we turn this upside down and inside out, what do we see? And to me, that is growth and development. That is, this is what it looks like, is questioning, right? And talking to people with different ideas and different life experiences and different views. So Exene, thank you so much for taking the time. And I would love to hear you just a little bit. What do you think, like if you had a magic wand, I have this like magic wand I bought in Mexico. Anyway, it sits on my desk. If you had a magic wand and you could sort of like waft some miracle or some gift onto the personal development field, what would it be? Like, what would you want to have them, like if you could just brainwash them in a second and have them get something, what would you want the designers, the creators, the practitioners of the personal development world to know?
I want to be the cult leader now. I have a lot of friends that have magic wands, but it's a different thing.
What you
I think that for me, and actually I think that like maybe the best way of saying it is starting with like the name of this and kind of like your subtitle of your book, right? Is if your view is that people are these independent, fully distinct from their environments, entities able to just like choose and create, exploitation isn't even a possibility. So the answer is easy for someone on the inside. It's always transformation, because who could possibly be exploited if they're 100% responsible for their own experience and generating things from nothing and create, right? So I want to say that any approach that is based in that real old school individualistic, like on steroids, like mystical individualistic, solipsistic kind of shit is bound to lead to harm. Maybe not the super intentional, like, look, we choke people here to get results kind of harm. But
not
the
so obvious harm,
it's bound to lead to harm, because you are literally, like, your blind spot is literally like 98% of how everything, including life, works. Like, you have more blind spot than not. And so if your group, your discipline, your people are not considering kind of group things, collective things, other strains of wisdom, like taking that stuff on board and knowing that there's more to a human than this weird little atom thing that's making shit up, ghost in the machine, then I might find another group, because sooner or later you will be getting at least repercussions and not even be able to see them for what they are or where they're coming from, because you are also believing some just wildly off bullshit.
Wow.
Thank
Very
you.
different look at responsibility. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the thing, whether or not we can agree or whether the listeners agree, we got to admire your chutzpah.
I love it. I
Thank
love
you.
my conversations with Exene. And if something comes up, that's one of the first people that I call. They are on my board of advisors. You know, I
Yeah.
say if you don't want to become a crazy cult leader, have a board of advisors of people who will talk to you, talk truth, that have different
Mhm.
ideas and different views and different perspectives. And
Yeah.
Exene, you are definitely one of those, and I am
And
grateful for
and you
you
can
taking
rely
the time.
on a queer person to tell it to you straight.
Yeah, weird how that works, huh?
Okay, you had to get that joke in there, didn't you?
Mark's been waiting on that for like 3 days.
Oh my God.
It just came up. I swear to God.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
So thanks everyone
Thanks.
for listening. And as always, there's plenty of conversation to be had. We're excited for people who are listening. And like one thing that was said is like, what's important in all of these conversations is that people will hear it the way they hear it, but we have to be saying it. That's kind of the mission here. We have to be saying this stuff because these are conversations that have been long overdue to be had. So whether or not you agree with us, no matter, just we're having the conversation. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.